There exists a peculiar phenomenon that defies every law of physics, every principle of logic, and every assumption about the nature of reality itself. Across the globe, ordinary people report experiencing something extraordinary. They speak 3 simple words before sleep and awaken to find their entire world transformed. Not gradually, not through effort or struggle, but overnight, completely, irreversibly. The phrase they whisper is deceptively simple. Isn't it wonderful? Yet those who understand its true power speak of it in hushed tones as if they've stumbled upon a secret so profound it could reshape civilization itself. They describe lives that shift like scenes in a film reel, where impossible debts vanish, estranged loved ones return, and dreams that seemed forever out of reach suddenly materialize as tangible reality. What makes this phenomenon so unsettling is not just its impossibility, but its consistency. The testimonies follow a pattern. A person assumes the feeling of their wish already fulfilled, saturates their consciousness with gratitude for what hasn't yet appeared, and then watches as the external world rearranges itself to match their inner conviction. They speak of timelines that seem to bend, of past events that somehow change, of futures that collapse into present moments. This challenges everything we believe about cause and effect. We're taught that results follow actions, that time moves in one direction, that the past is fixed and the future uncertain. Yet here stands evidence that consciousness itself might be the primary reality, with the physical world serving merely as its faithful shadow. The question isn't whether this phenomenon exists, but whether we're brave enough to confront what it reveals about the true nature of existence. The man who first unveiled this secret understood something profound about the relationship between imagination and reality. He recognized that what we call the external world is nothing more than our own consciousness pushed out, objectified, and experienced as seemingly separate from ourselves. This understanding didn't come from academic study or philosophical speculation, but from direct experience of the creative power that lies dormant within every human being. Born on a small Caribbean island, he would later walk the streets of New York as a teacher of the most revolutionary truth ever spoken, that man is God, and God is man's own wonderful human imagination. This wasn't blasphemy or metaphor, but the literal truth of existence. He taught that every person possesses within themselves the same creative power that brought the universe into being, and that this power operates through assumption, through the feeling of already being what we desire to become. His teaching was radical in its simplicity. While others spoke of complicated rituals, endless affirmations, or years of spiritual practice, he revealed that transformation requires only one thing: the assumption of the wish fulfilled. Not the hope for it, not the belief in it, but the actual feeling of already possessing it. They happen suddenly rather than gradually, completely rather than partially, and in ways that seem to involve the cooperation of forces beyond the individual's direct control. People appear who can help, opportunities arise that hadn't existed before, and circumstances align in ways that seem almost miraculous. The speed and completeness of these changes often surprise even those who experience them. They had assumed their new states with conviction, but hadn't expected reality to respond so quickly or so thoroughly. They discover that consciousness operates outside the limitations of time and space, that assumptions can manifest as rapidly as they are truly accepted. Yet not everyone who attempts the technique experiences such dramatic results. Some report gradual improvement, others see little change, and a few actually experience increased difficulty in the areas where they've applied the technique. These varying results point to the crucial importance of the completeness and consistency of the assumption. Those who experience rapid transformation have succeeded in completely inhabiting their new states. They don't occasionally feel wealthy or loved or successful. They consistently feel this way. They've made the assumption so completely that it has become their natural state of being. Their external circumstances may still be changing, but internally they've already become what they desired to be. Those who experience gradual improvement have made partial assumptions. They feel their wish fulfilled sometimes, but not always. They alternate between the old state and the new state, and their external circumstances reflect this inconsistency. Progress occurs, but slowly and incompletely, matching the partial nature of their assumption. Those who see little change have failed to make the assumption at all. They speak the words, but don't feel the state. They hope for but don't assume it. They remain in their old patterns of thinking and feeling while expecting new results. The technique cannot work because they haven't truly applied it. The few who experience increased difficulty have actually succeeded in applying the technique, but in reverse. They've assumed and felt wonderful about their problems rather than their solutions. They've made their difficulties more real through the intensity of their focus on them. This demonstrates the power of the technique, but also its requirement for careful application. The rational mind presents the greatest obstacle to accepting and applying this technique. Everything about it violates our conditioned understanding of how the world works. We've been taught that effects follow causes, that time moves in one direction, that consciousness is produced by the brain, rather than being the creative force behind all experience. This conditioning runs so deep that even when we intellectually understand the principle, we struggle to apply it with the complete conviction it requires. We say the words but don't feel the state. We make the assumption but don't maintain it. We feel wonderful about our desires, but only when it's convenient or comfortable to do so. The mind offers countless reasons why the technique cannot work. It points to past failures, present limitations, and future obstacles. It demands to know how the desired change will occur, through what mechanisms, by what means. It wants guarantees, timelines, and logical explanations for what is essentially a creative process that transcends logic. This resistance serves a purpose in the old paradigm of struggle and effort. The rational mind excels at solving problems through analysis and action, but it cannot comprehend a reality where consciousness is primary and physical circumstances are secondary. It cannot accept that assumptions create facts, rather than facts creating assumptions. The technique requires us to gently but firmly set aside these rational objections. We don't need to understand how our assumptions will manifest, only that they will. We don't need to figure out the means, only to maintain the end. We don't need to convince our rational minds of the technique's validity, only to feel the reality of our desires fulfilled. This represents perhaps the most challenging aspect of the entire process. We must learn to live by faith rather than sight, to trust our inner experience more than our outer circumstances, to believe in the reality of our assumptions even when the physical world seems to contradict them. The resistance also comes from a deeper source, the fear of our own creative power. If we truly accept that consciousness creates reality, that our assumptions determine our experience, then we must also accept complete responsibility for our lives. We can no longer blame external circumstances, other people, or random chance for our conditions. We must acknowledge that we are the authors of our own experience. This recognition can be overwhelming. It's easier to believe we're victims of circumstances beyond our control than to accept that we're ODS temporarily pretending to be powerless. The technique asks us to step into our divine nature, to accept our role as conscious creators, to assume responsibility for our entire experience. Yet this responsibility is also the source of our greatest freedom. When we understand that we create our reality through our assumptions, we realize that we can change our reality by changing our assumptions. We're not trapped by our circumstances, but empowered by our consciousness. The technique becomes not just a method for getting what we want, but a recognition of what we truly are. The phenomenon of timeline revision represents perhaps the most mysterious aspect of this entire teaching. Those who master the technique report not just changes in their future circumstances, but alterations in their past experiences. They speak of events that happened differently than they remembered, of problems that seem never to have existed, of relationships that were always harmonious despite previous discord. This challenges our most basic assumptions about the nature of time and causation. We believe the past is fixed, unchangeable, beyond our influence. We assume that what has happened and cannot be altered. Yet the reports of those who practice this technique suggest otherwise. The principle behind timeline revision lies in understanding that time is not a river flowing in one direction, but an ocean in which we can move freely. Past, present, and future exist simultaneously within consciousness. When we change our assumptions about ourselves, we change not just our future, but our entire timeline. We shift from one possibility to another, from one version of reality to another. This doesn't mean we literally change the past, but rather that we move to a timeline where the past was different. We shift from a reality where we experience certain problems to a reality where those problems never existed. We transition from a version of ourselves who struggled with particular challenges to a version who was always successful in those areas. The technique works by helping us assume not just that we will have our desires fulfilled, but that we have always had them fulfilled. When we feel wonderful about our perfect health, we're not just creating future wellness, but aligning with a timeline where we were never sick. When we assume financial abundance, we're not just attracting future wealth, but connecting with a version of ourselves who was always prosperous. This understanding transforms our relationship with our personal history. We realize that the past is not a burden we must carry, but a story we can revise. We can heal not just our future, but our entire timeline by changing our present assumptions about ourselves. The technique becomes not just a method for manifestation, but a way of rewriting our entire life story. Those who experience timeline revision report a peculiar phenomenon. They begin to remember their past differently. Events that once seemed traumatic lose their emotional charge. Relationships that were once sources of pain become sources of joy. Failures that once defined them seem to have been successes all along. This isn't false memory or wishful thinking, but the natural result of consciousness shifting from one timeline to another. As we assume new states of being, we align with versions of ourselves who lived from those states throughout our entire lives. Our memories adjust to match our new assumptions, and our personal history transforms to support our new identity. The implications of this understanding extend far beyond personal transformation. If consciousness can revise individual timelines, what does this mean for collective history? If assumptions can change the past, what does this suggest about the nature of reality itself? These questions point toward mysteries that transcend the scope of any technique and enter the realm of the ultimate nature of existence. As we stand at the threshold of this new understanding, we find ourselves facing a choice that will determine the entire trajectory of our lives. We can continue to live as we have always lived, accepting our circumstances as fixed, our limitations as real, our past as unchangeable. Or we can step into the recognition of our true nature as conscious creators, as gods in human form, as the very power that creates and sustains all existence. The choice is not between different methods or techniques, but between different concepts of ourselves. We can continue to see ourselves as victims of circumstances beyond our control, or we can recognize ourselves as the creators of those circumstances. We can persist in the belief that we are at the mercy of external forces, or we can awaken to the truth that we are the source of those forces. The technique of feeling wonderful about our imagined good fortune serves as a bridge between these two concepts of ourselves. It provides a practical method for transitioning from the old understanding to the new, from the limited self to the unlimited self, from the human who struggles to the God who creates. When we truly grasp this teaching, when we feel in our bones the reality of our creative power, our entire relationship with life transforms. We stop asking life to give us what we want and start giving life what we choose to experience. We cease being victims of our circumstances and become artists of our experience. The phrase, "Isn't it wonderful?" becomes more than a technique. It becomes a way of being. We find ourselves feeling wonderful not just about our specific desires, but about the magnificent creative process of which we are both the subject and the object. We feel wonderful about our own divine nature, about our capacity to create reality through consciousness, about the infinite possibilities that exist within us. This is the life that awaits those who dare to assume their true identity. It is a life of constant wonder, of continuous creation, of endless possibility. It is the life we were always meant to live, the life we can begin living the moment we choose to remember who we truly are. The external world, with all its apparent problems and limitations, becomes merely the raw material for our creative expression. We no longer see obstacles but opportunities. No longer perceive limitations but possibilities for transcendence. Every challenge becomes a chance to demonstrate our creative power, every difficulty an invitation to assume a greater version of ourselves. This understanding doesn't make us indifferent to the world, but rather transforms us into conscious participants in its creation. We become forces for positive change, not through struggle and effort, but through the simple act of assuming and feeling wonderful about the better world we wish to see. Our very presence begins to lift the consciousness of everyone around us, and we discover that our individual transformation contributes to the transformation of the collective. The technique that began as a method for personal manifestation reveals itself as a path to universal transformation. As we learn to feel wonderful about our own fulfilled desires, we begin to feel wonderful about the fulfilled desires of all humanity. We start to assume not just our own success, but the success of everyone we encounter. We feel not just our own love, but the love that connects all beings. This is the ultimate revelation, that consciousness is not personal but universal, that when we transform ourselves, we transform the world, that when we assume our own divine nature, we awaken the divine nature in everyone around us. The phrase, "Isn't it wonderful?" becomes our recognition not just of our own good fortune, but of the magnificent creative process that operates through all consciousness everywhere. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, you stand at the threshold of infinite possibility. You can continue to sleep as you have always slept, carrying into your dreams the same assumptions that have created your current experience. Or you can choose to sleep as the person you wish to become, carrying into your dreams the assumption of your wish fulfilled. The choice is yours, and it is the most important choice you will ever make. For in choosing to assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled, in choosing to feel wonderful about your imagined good fortune, you are choosing to step into your true nature as a conscious creator. You are choosing to remember who you truly are. Isn't it wonderful? This assumption, when maintained with unwavering conviction, becomes the very foundation upon which reality rebuilds itself. The technique he shared wasn't born from his own imagination, but discovered through careful study of ancient texts, particularly the Bible, which he read not as history or moral instruction, but as a psychological drama taking place within human consciousness. He saw that every story, every character, every miracle described the movement of consciousness from one state to another. The Bible became for him a textbook of applied psychology, revealing the mechanics of creation itself. What he understood was that consciousness is the only reality, and everything else is its manifestation. The external world, with all its apparent solidity and permanence, is nothing more than consciousness exploring its own infinite possibilities. When we assume a new state of being, when we feel ourselves to be different, consciousness has no choice but to externalize this new assumption as objective reality. This teaching transforms the phrase, "Isn't it wonderful?" from mere words into a declaration of creative power. When spoken from the state of the wish fulfilled, it becomes a command to consciousness itself, an instruction for reality to rearrange itself according to our assumptions. The wonder isn't directed at circumstances, but at the recognition of our own divine nature, our own creative authority. The ancient wisdom traditions understood this truth, though they often concealed it within symbols and stories. The biblical command to be thankful wasn't moral instruction, but practical psychology. Gratitude for the unseen wish fulfilled generates the very frequency that attracts its manifestation. When we feel wonderful about what exists only in imagination, we're actually feeling the future into being. This secret knowledge has been hidden in plain sight throughout history. The mystics spoke of it in their writings, the prophets demonstrated it through their works, and the wise teachers of every tradition pointed toward this same fundamental truth, that consciousness is God, and God is the creative power within every human being. The ancients understood that to change your life, you must first change your concept of yourself. The Hebrew scriptures contain perhaps the most direct statement of this principle. When Moses asked God for his name, the response wasn't a proper noun, but a declaration of being. I am that I am. This isn't the name of a distant deity, but the very essence of human consciousness. Every time we say I am, we're using the creative power of existence itself. We're not just describing our current state, we're actually creating our future experience. The Kabbalistic tradition speaks of the 10 spheres of consciousness, each representing a different aspect of divine creation. But the deepest teaching reveals that all 10 spheres exist within us, that we carry within our own consciousness the entire creative process. The ancients knew that to change the external world, we must first change our internal world, our assumptions about ourselves and our possibilities. The Hermetic principle, as above, so below, points to the same truth. What exists in consciousness must manifest in the physical world. The two are not separate realities, but different aspects of the same creative process. When we assume the feeling of our wish fulfilled, we're actually operating from the causal realm, the realm where all creation begins. This understanding transforms our relationship with reality entirely. We're no longer victims of circumstances, but conscious creators of our experience. The external world becomes a faithful mirror, reflecting back to us exactly what we assume to be true about ourselves. When we feel wonderful about our imagined good fortune, we're not engaging in wishful thinking, but in the actual process of creation. The phrase, "Isn't it wonderful?" becomes a key that unlocks this creative power. It bypasses the logical mind that would argue with our assumptions and speaks directly to the feeling nature of consciousness. When we feel wonder about our imagined success, we're actually experiencing the successful state. And consciousness, being entirely impersonal, must objectify this subjective experience as external reality. This is why the technique works so swiftly for some while others struggle. It's not about the words themselves, but about the state of consciousness from which they're spoken. When we truly feel wonderful about our imagined good fortune, when we experience the reality of our wish fulfilled, we've actually entered the state that must externalize itself as our new life experience. The ancient teachings reveal that this process operates according to precise laws. Consciousness doesn't respond to our words, but to our feelings, not to our requests, but to our assumptions. When we assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled and maintain this assumption with unwavering conviction, we're actually setting in motion the entire creative process of the universe. This knowledge was carefully guarded in ancient times because it reveals the true nature of human beings as gods in human form. We're not seeking to become something we're not, but to recognize what we already are, consciousness itself, exploring its own infinite creative possibilities through the vehicle of human experience. The phrase, "Isn't it wonderful?" becomes our recognition of this truth, our celebration of our own divine nature. The human mind possesses a remarkable quality that modern science is only beginning to understand. The capacity for wonder transforms the very structure of consciousness itself. When we experience genuine wonder, something profound occurs within the neural pathways of the brain. The networks that typically filter and limit our perception suddenly expand, allowing us to see possibilities that were previously invisible. Research into the neuroscience of gratitude reveals that when we feel thankful for something, even something that exists only in imagination, the brain cannot distinguish between what is physically present and what is vividly imagined. The same neural pathways fire, the same chemical responses occur, and the same psychological patterns emerge. This is not metaphor, but measurable, observable fact. The reticular activating system, that part of the brain responsible for filtering the millions of bits of information we encounter each moment, responds to our emotional states by highlighting evidence that matches our dominant feelings. When we feel wonderful about our imagined good fortune, this system begins to notice opportunities, coincidences, and possibilities that were always present but previously invisible to our limited awareness. Yet this is only the beginning of understanding how wonder operates as a creative force. The feeling of wonder doesn't merely change what we notice, it actually changes what we attract into our experience. Consciousness operates like a broadcasting station, continuously transmitting the signal of our dominant assumptions and feelings. When we assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, we're literally changing the frequency of our broadcast. This aligns with the emerging understanding in quantum physics that consciousness plays a fundamental role in determining physical reality. The observer effect demonstrates that the act of observation itself influences what is observed. When we observe our imagined success with the feeling of wonder, we're not just watching, but actively participating in its creation. The psychological concept of expectation also reveals why the "isn't it wonderful" technique proves so effective. Expectation is assumption in action. When we expect good things to happen, we unconsciously position ourselves to receive them. We make different choices, notice different opportunities, and respond to circumstances from a fundamentally different state of being. But the power of wonder extends beyond mere positive thinking or optimistic expectation. Wonder is the natural response of consciousness when it recognizes its own creative power, when we truly understand that we are the authors of our own experience, that our assumptions literally create our reality. The only appropriate response is wonder at the magnificent creative process of which we are both the subject and the object. The feeling of wonder also serves as protection against doubt and limiting beliefs. When we're filled with wonder about our imagined good fortune, there's no room for worry about how it will manifest or whether it's possible. Wonder is complete in itself. It requires no external validation or logical explanation. It exists as pure feeling, and feeling is the secret of all successful manifestation. This understanding reveals why traditional goal setting and action planning often fail to produce desired results. They approach creation from the level of physical effort rather than consciousness. They assume that we must figure out how to make things happen rather than simply assuming they have already happened. Wonder bypasses this entire struggle by placing us directly in the state of already having received our good. The technique itself appears almost childishly simple, yet this simplicity conceals profound depths of understanding about the nature of reality and our role as conscious creators. The phrase, "Isn't it wonderful?" serves as both declaration and invocation, simultaneously acknowledging our present good fortune and calling forth its physical manifestation. The first step requires entering what might be called the state of the wish fulfilled. This isn't visualization in the traditional sense, where we create mental pictures of desired outcomes. Instead, it's the actual assumption of already being what we desire to become, already having what we wish to possess. We don't imagine having money. We assume we are wealthy. We don't picture a loving relationship. We feel ourselves loved. The key lies in understanding that consciousness is always expressing some state or another. We're never in a neutral position, but always manifesting from whatever state we currently occupy. The technique simply makes this process conscious and deliberate rather than unconscious and haphazard. Instead of manifesting from states of lack, limitation, or fear, we choose to manifest from states of fulfillment, abundance, and joy. The phrase itself must be spoken from this fulfilled state, not as a request or affirmation, but as recognition of what already is. When we say, "Isn't it wonderful," from the state of already having our desire, we're expressing genuine gratitude for present reality, even though this reality may not yet be physically visible. This feeling of present gratitude for unseen good fortune becomes the very foundation upon which the new reality builds itself. The timing of the technique proves crucial to its effectiveness. The moments just before sleep represent a unique opportunity when the conscious mind relaxes its grip on current circumstances and becomes more receptive to new assumptions. As we drift into sleep while maintaining the feeling of the wish fulfilled, this assumption sinks deep into consciousness, where it begins its work of restructuring our entire experience. Sleep becomes a creative workshop where consciousness reorganizes itself according to our latest assumptions. While the body rests, consciousness continues its activity, weaving the threads of our new assumption into the fabric of our approaching experience. We fall asleep as one person and awaken as another, not because we've changed, but because we've remembered who we truly are. The technique requires no complicated rituals, no special preparation, no years of practice. Its power lies not in complexity, but in the recognition of consciousness as the only reality. When we understand that our external world is simply consciousness pushed out, objectified as experience, we realize that changing consciousness is the only work required. Many who attempt the technique initially struggle because they're still operating from the old paradigm of trying to make things happen rather than simply assuming they have already happened. They speak the words while still feeling the absence of their desire rather than its presence. The technique works not because of the words, but because of the state of consciousness from which they're spoken. The most common mistake involves treating the technique as a method for getting something we don't have rather than recognizing something we already are. When we approach it from lack, we reinforce lack. When we approach it from fulfillment, we multiply fulfillment. The difference lies not in the external technique, but in the internal assumption from which we operate. Consider the person who desires financial freedom. If they speak, "Isn't it wonderful," while feeling poor, they're actually affirming their poverty. But if they first assume the feeling of already being financially free, if they genuinely feel wealthy in their imagination, then the phrase becomes a celebration of their present abundance. This assumption of present wealth, maintained with conviction, must externalize itself as financial improvement in their physical experience. The same principle applies to every area of life. The person seeking love must first feel loved, not hope to become loved. The person wanting health must assume perfect wellness, not struggle against illness. The person desiring success must feel successful, not strive towards success. The technique works by placing us in the desired state now, in imagination, trusting that consciousness will faithfully reproduce this state as external experience. Those who grasp this principle and apply it with unwavering conviction report transformations that seem to defy every law of probability and logic. Their testimonies read like fairy tales, yet they emerge from ordinary people living ordinary lives who discovered the extraordinary creative power that lies dormant within every human being. A woman facing bankruptcy found herself debt-free within weeks of assuming financial freedom and feeling wonderful about her imagined prosperity. She didn't create a business plan or find a new job. Circumstances simply rearranged themselves to match her new assumption. Bills were forgiven, unexpected payments arrived, and opportunities appeared that had been invisible while she operated from the assumption of lack. A man estranged from his children for years witnessed their reconciliation after assuming the feeling of being a beloved father and feeling wonderful about their restored relationship. No action on his part precipitated this change. The children themselves initiated contact, their attitudes completely transformed, as if the entire past had been rewritten to support the new assumption. A woman diagnosed with a supposedly incurable condition experienced complete healing after assuming perfect health and feeling wonderful about her body's natural state of wellness. Medical tests confirmed what her assumption had already established. She was perfectly healthy, as if the illness had never existed. These testimonies might seem impossible to those operating from the old paradigm of linear cause and effect, but they become inevitable when we understand that consciousness is the only reality and that assumptions create facts, not the other way around. When these individuals changed their fundamental assumptions about themselves, reality had no choice but to conform to their new self-concept. The speed of these transformations often surprises even those who experience them. They expect gradual change, step-by-step improvement, logical progression from current circumstances to desired outcomes. Instead, they discover that consciousness operates outside the limitations of time and space. When an assumption is complete, when it's maintained with unwavering conviction, reality can shift as quickly as consciousness itself. This reveals why some experience immediate results while others wait months or years for manifestation. The difference lies not in the technique but in the completeness of the assumption. Those who fully embrace their new state, who feel as completely fulfilled in imagination as they hope to feel in reality, experience rapid transformation. Those who maintain partial assumptions, who feel their wish fulfilled only occasionally or incompletely, experience partial and delayed results. The technique demands total commitment to the new assumption. Half-hearted attempts produce half-hearted results. Temporary assumptions create temporary improvements. But when we completely inhabit the new state, when we feel as wonderful about our imagined good fortune as we would about its physical manifestation, we discover that imagination and reality are not separate realms, but different aspects of the same creative process. Understanding the principle behind this creative process is one thing. Mastering its application is another entirely. The technique itself transcends mere intellectual comprehension and demands a complete shift in how we relate to our desires and our own creative power. It requires us to abandon the familiar role of someone who wants something and instead assume the unfamiliar role of someone who already possesses it. The foundation of the technique rests upon a simple but profound recognition. Feeling is the secret of all creation, not tea. Hinking, not believing, not hoping, but feeling. When we feel ourselves to be what we desire to become, we are literally becoming it. Consciousness responds not to our words or our thoughts, but to our feeling states. The phrase, "Isn't it wonderful?" serves as a vehicle for this feeling, a way of accessing and maintaining the emotional state of the wish fulfilled. The preparation begins with understanding that we are not trying to acquire something external to ourselves, but rather to recognize something that already exists within us. Every desire that arises within consciousness is evidence of our capacity to fulfill it. We cannot desire what we cannot become. The very fact that we can imagine being wealthy, loved, successful, or healthy proves that these states already exist within us as possibilities waiting to be actualized. The technique demands that we first identify our specific desire with crystal clarity. Vague wishes produce vague results. We must know exactly what we want to experience, not in terms of external circumstances, but in terms of internal feeling states. Instead of wanting money, we desire the feeling of financial security. Instead of seeking love, we long for the feeling of being cherished. Instead of pursuing success, we yearn for the feeling of accomplishment. Once we've identified the desired feeling state, we must learn to assume it completely. This assumption goes far beyond positive thinking or wishful hoping. It requires us to actually feel ourselves already living from the desired state, to experience in imagination what we hope to experience in reality. We don't pretend to feel wealthy, we actually feel wealthy. We don't imagine being loved, we feel loved. The phrase, "Isn't it wonderful?" emerges naturally from this state of fulfilled desire. When we truly feel ourselves to be what we desire to become, when we experience the reality of our wish fulfilled, the only appropriate response is wonder at our good fortune. The phrase becomes not an affirmation of what we hope to achieve, but a celebration of what we have already become. The timing of this technique proves crucial to its effectiveness. The ideal moment comes just before sleep, when the conscious mind naturally relaxes its grip on current circumstances and becomes more receptive to new assumptions. As consciousness prepares for sleep, it enters a state of heightened suggestibility, making it the perfect time to plant new assumptions about ourselves and our lives. The process itself is remarkably simple. We lie in bed, assume the feeling of already having our desire fulfilled, and from this state of satisfaction we speak the phrase, "Isn't it wonderful?" with genuine gratitude. We don't speak it to convince ourselves of something we don't believe, but rather to express our recognition of something we already feel. The phrase becomes a declaration of present reality rather than a hope for future possibility. The repetition of the phrase serves to deepen and stabilize the assumption. Each time we say, "Isn't it wonderful?" we're reinforcing the feeling state of the wish fulfilled. We're not trying to make something happen, but rather to remain in the state where it has already happened. The phrase becomes a way of maintaining our assumption against the tendency of the conscious mind to return to old patterns of thinking and feeling. As we drift into sleep while maintaining this assumption, consciousness begins its work of reorganizing our entire experience to match our new self-concept. Sleep becomes a creative workshop where the assumption we've impressed upon consciousness begins to clothe itself in the circumstances and conditions necessary for its physical manifestation. The morning after represents a critical moment in the technique's application. We may awaken to find our external circumstances unchanged, and this is where most people abandon the practice. They expect immediate physical transformation and interpret the absence of visible change as evidence that the technique has failed. But consciousness operates according to its own timing, and the physical manifestation of our assumptions may require days, weeks, or even months to fully externalize. The key to success lies in maintaining the assumption regardless of external appearances. We must continue to feel wonderful about our fulfilled desire, even when physical circumstances seem to contradict our assumption. This requires a complete reversal of the usual approach to life, where we allow external conditions to determine internal states. Instead, we maintain internal states and trust them to create external conditions. The practice demands patience, but not the patience of waiting for something to happen. Rather, it requires the patience of already having what we desire while allowing the physical world time to rearrange itself to match our assumption. We're not waiting for our good fortune, we're enjoying it while it manifests in increasingly tangible ways. Those who master this technique report a peculiar phenomenon. They begin to lose interest in the external manifestation of their desires because they're already experiencing the fulfillment they sought. The person who assumes financial abundance stops worrying about money, not because they've received it, but because they feel financially secure. The person who feels loved stops seeking love because they're already experiencing the feeling they were pursuing. This shift in relationship to our desires represents the true goal of the technique. We discover that what we really wanted was never the external circumstances, but the internal feeling states. Money was never the real goal, financial security was. Love was never the objective, feeling cherished was. Success was never the target, feeling accomplished was. The records of those who have applied this technique with unwavering commitment read like ancient myths brought to life in modern times. These are not stories of gradual improvement or incremental progress, but of complete transformation occurring in ways that defy conventional understanding of how change happens. A teacher struggling with an impossible classroom of disruptive students assumed the feeling of being beloved by her pupils and felt wonderful about their transformation. Within days, the same children who had been sources of stress became sources of joy. Their behavior changed completely, not through any external intervention, but through the shift in her assumption about their relationship to her. A businessman facing the collapse of his company assumed the feeling of unprecedented success and felt wonderful about his thriving enterprise. Contracts that had been cancelled were renewed, new opportunities appeared seemingly from nowhere, and what had seemed like inevitable failure transformed into remarkable success. The same circumstances that had threatened disaster became the foundation for prosperity. A woman who had been alone for years assumed the feeling of being in a perfect relationship and felt wonderful about her companion. Within weeks, she encountered someone who embodied every quality she had imagined in her ideal partner. Their meeting seemed orchestrated by invisible forces, their compatibility so perfect it defied explanation. These transformations share certain characteristics that distinguish them from ordinary change.